They thought they could take everything from me. A greedy HOA, a corrupt county office, and a ruthless woman who'd stop at nothing to expand her empire. They bulldozed my fields, tore through my family's legacy like it was nothing but dirt. But here's the thing: they messed with the wrong man. I'm not just some old farmer they can bully into submission. I'm the one who's about to expose every last one of them. What happens next? It's a relentless fight against lies, betrayal, and a conspiracy so deep it nearly broke me. But nearly isn't good enough. Because when you come for everything a man has, you'd better be ready for the war he brings. And trust me, the ending will leave you stunned. Before we dive in, tell me where you're tuning in from and what brought you here. Drop a comment below. I'm listening. I've lived on Haven Hill my whole life. You could say I was born with dirt under my fingernails and a sunrise in my eyes. This land, it's been in my family for over 120 years. My grandfather bought it when he was just a young man, looking to make something of himself. Built the first barn with his own two hands, right where it still stands today, weather-beaten, paint-peeling, but strong as ever. My father inherited the place from him, and I took over when Dad passed away a few years back. To me, Haven Hill was more than just a farm. It was a piece of history, my history. I spent my youth here, learned how to work the land, how to treat it with respect. Even when I moved away, built a career in architecture up in New York. This place kept calling me back. So when I retired, I packed up my things and came home. Back to the quiet mornings with the mist hanging low over the fields. Back to the crisp air and the sound of bird song that always seemed to greet the dawn. It was my sanctuary, and I wasn't planning on ever leaving it again. Silver Creek used to be a sleepy little town. Everybody knew everybody. You could walk down Main Street and wave to half a dozen folks you'd known your whole life. But things change. Over the years, developers started sniffing around, seeing the potential for luxury homes with scenic views. A couple of big money types swooped in, bought up old farmland, and turned it into what they like to call a lifestyle experience. Valley Ridge is the newest monstrosity. They've thrown up one of those gated communities where the houses are all pristine, white, and gray, the lawns perfectly manicured, and the residents treat their HOA rules like the word of God. I didn't pay much attention to Valley Ridge when they built it. Figured it was just another fancy neighborhood for city folks trying to escape the rat race. Didn't bother me, and I sure as hell didn't bother them. My farm was on the edge of their property, but Haven Hill had been there long before their glass and steel monstrosities ever rose up from the dirt. But then she showed up. It was early one morning. I was sitting out on the porch, nursing a mug of coffee, and watching the sun break through the trees. The air was cool, clean, peaceful. Then I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I looked up and saw a white BMW rolling down my driveway like it owned the place. The woman who stepped out of that car looked like she'd just walked off the cover of some high-end fashion magazine. Crisp white pantsuit, hair cut sharp and neat, heels that sank a little into the dirt with every step. "Mr. Carter?" she called out, her voice crisp and clipped, like she was used to giving orders. "That's me," I said, setting my mug down and getting to my feet. "I'm Linda Parks, president of the Valley Ridge Homeowners Association." She handed me a business card like she was doing me some kind of favor. "I'm here to discuss a matter of mutual interest." I glanced at the card, then back at her. Everything about her was polished, perfect, and cold, like she didn't know what it was to sweat a day's work. "All right," I said slowly. "What's this about?" She flashed me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Carter, we've received numerous complaints from Valley Ridge residents about the state of your property. The old barn, the uncut fields, they're, well, unsightly. A detriment to the aesthetic we've worked so hard to create. Home values are declining because of what people see when they look over their fences." I just stared at her, not quite believing what I was hearing. "This land has been here long before Valley Ridge even existed, and it's not part of your precious HOA." "That may be so," she said, her smile tightening. but the appearance of your property affects the overall aesthetic of the area. We at Valley Ridge pride ourselves on maintaining a certain standard, and frankly, your farm doesn't meet those standards. I folded my arms across my chest. I've got standards of my own, Miss Parks, and my land's got nothing to do with your HOA. Her eyes narrowed just a bit, like she wasn't used to anyone standing up to her. We've also noticed you're running irrigation systems that are outdated. There's concern about contamination. The residents of Valley Ridge rely on clean water, and we have reason to believe your antiquated methods may pose a risk. Now that's just nonsense, I replied. My water comes from a reservoir right here on my property. Has nothing to do with Valley Ridge. Linda leaned in a little, her smile now more like a predator's grin. Water rights in this county are a complicated matter, Mr. Carter, and we at Valley Ridge are prepared to offer you a generous sum to purchase your land, enough to set you up comfortably for the rest of your life. I laughed, but there wasn't anything funny about her offer. I'm not interested. Haven Hill isn't for sale. Her smile vanished, just like that, replaced by something colder. That's unfortunate, she said, her voice low and controlled, because if you refuse our offer, we'll have to pursue other measures to protect our community's interests. What kind of measures? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Let's just say, she replied, tucking her business card into my shirt pocket, there are ways to make life very difficult for someone who doesn't cooperate. We'll be in touch. And with that, she turned on her heel and marched back to her car. The engine roared to life, and she drove off, tires spitting gravel behind her. I stood there on the porch, my fists clenched, that little business card crumpled in my hand. I wanted to brush it off, tell myself she was just another entitled city woman with too much time on her hands. But something about her visit left a chill deep in my bones. Because if there's one thing I've learned in my life, it's that when people like Linda Parks don't get what they want, they don't just walk away. They come back harder and nastier. I thought that was the end of it. I figured Linda Parks would storm off to her little mansion, complain to her HOA cronies over wine and hors d'oeuvres, and find someone else to bully. I was wrong. It started small, subtle. A letter in the mail from Valley Ridge's HOA. Official-looking stationery, all polished and prim like the woman herself. The first notice was just a warning, some legal-sounding jargon about property maintenance standards and aesthetic compliance. I threw it in the trash. Then came the next one, and the next. Each letter ramped up the pressure. Fines were mentioned, threats of legal action. They claimed my unpainted barn and overgrown fields were a visual blight that detracted from the property values of Valley Ridge. The last letter I got had a bright red stamp across the top. Final notice. They were demanding I either renovate my barn, cut down my fields, and re-landscape my property to fit their standards, or face a lawsuit. It was laughable. I didn't owe those people anything. My family had worked this land for over a century without answering to anyone but ourselves. And I sure as hell wasn't about to start now. A few weeks passed, and I didn't hear anything from Linda or her HOA goons. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd finally realized they were barking up the wrong tree. I was wrong about that too. One morning, I headed into town for supplies, needed to pick up some new hoses and a few gallons of paint. Figured if it made them feel better, I'd slap a fresh coat on the barn. Not for their sake, but just because it was time. The old thing deserved a little respect. The hardware store was busy that day, and as I wandered the aisles, I caught snippets of conversation, my name being whispered here and there, and not in a friendly way. It wasn't until I reached the counter that old Earl, the store's owner, let me in on what was going on. "Henry, you got yourself a problem," he said, scratching at his silver-streaked beard. "Tell me something I don't know," I replied, tossing a coil of hose onto the counter. "I mean a real problem," he continued, his voice low. "Word around town is that the Valley Ridge HOA's been making a stink about your place, claiming your farm's an eyesore and a health hazard." I laughed, but it was more out of disbelief than amusement. A health hazard? To who? The deer? They're saying your irrigation system's contaminated, that it's leaking into their water supply. Whole bunch of nonsense if you ask me, but they're throwing a lot of money around to make folks believe it. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My irrigation system was old, sure, but I kept it in good working order, and my water came from the reservoir right here on Haven Hill. It didn't flow to Valley Ridge, and it sure as hell wasn't contaminating anything. Earl shook his head. They've been going around passing out flyers, trying to turn the town against you, talking about lawsuits, and all kinds of legal mumbo-jumbo. Let them talk, I said, keeping my voice steady. My property's not under their jurisdiction. Maybe not, Earl replied, his eyes filled with worry. But Linda Parks, she's got connections, money. And when you've got both of those, the law tends to bend your way. I thanked Earl for the warning, paid for my supplies, and headed back home. But the whole drive, my thoughts were spinning. The more I thought about it, the more I realized Linda wasn't just trying to strong-arm me. She was trying to isolate me, turn the whole town against me so I'd have no choice but to sell. I tried to put it out of my mind. Figured if I just ignored her, she'd move on to some other poor soul to torment. But a few days later, I got another letter in the mail. This one wasn't from Valley Ridge. It was from the county office. It was a notice of violation, something about improper use of water resources and failure to comply with local safety standards. The kind of language that looks official but means nothing unless someone's paid good money to make it stick. I called up the county clerk's office, figuring it was just a mistake. They told me I'd have to come in and file an appeal if I wanted the violation removed. I made the drive into town that afternoon, feeling my anger simmering beneath the surface. But when I walked into the county office, I realized just how deep Linda's influence ran. The receptionist wouldn't even look me in the eye, kept her voice all stiff and professional, as she handed me a stack of forms thicker than my old man's Bible. "Fill these out and return them within 30 days, she said, like she was reading from a script. Failure to do so will result in additional penalties. Penalties for what? I asked, my patience wearing thin. My irrigation system's been here longer than most of those houses in Valley Ridge. She just shrugged. I'm sorry, sir. I'm just following procedure. I spent the next few hours filling out those forms. Tedious, mind-numbing paperwork that seemed designed to make you give up halfway through. But I wasn't about to let Linda win, not without a fight. When I finally handed the forms back, the receptionist glanced at them like she couldn't care less. We'll be in touch, she said, her eyes already drifting back to her computer screen. I walked out of that office feeling like I'd just wasted a whole damn day. But as I drove back to Haven Hill, something started to eat away at me. If Linda was willing to go this far, if she'd already managed to pull strings at the county level, what else was she planning? I didn't have to wait long to find out, because the very next morning, as I was sipping my coffee and trying to shake off the frustration from the day before, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Linda Parks wasn't just playing games anymore. She'd declared war. It was just before dawn when I heard the engines. Heavy, growling machines rolling up the gravel path toward Haven Hill. The sound cut through the early morning, quiet like a knife. It didn't belong here. Not in my world. I threw on my boots and stumbled out the door, the chill of the air biting against my skin. But nothing could prepare me for what I saw when I rounded the corner of the barn. 3 massive yellow bulldozers were lined up at the edge of my eastern field, their blades lowered, engines rumbling like wild beasts, ready to charge. And leading them, standing there like a goddamn general directing her troops, was Linda Parks. She spotted me and lifted her chin with that same smug smile I'd come to hate. A small army of Valley Ridge HOA board members stood beside her, all dressed in their perfect little uniforms, pale blue polos with that HOA logo embroidered over their chests, as if they were some kind of official enforcement squad. What the hell is going on? I shouted, my voice cutting through the morning air. Linda stepped forward, heels sinking into the damp ground with every step. "Mr. Carter, I was hoping you'd join us before we began." "Before you began what?" I asked, fists clenched at my sides. She held up a stack of papers like they were sacred texts. "This area here is being cleared for a community garden and recreational area. We're providing a valuable service to the residents of Valley Ridge, something beautiful to enhance their quality of life. On my land?" I practically growled. "You've lost your damn mind. This is Haven Hill, my family's land, and you have no right. The documents say otherwise." She thrust the papers toward me, her smile widening. "We have legal ownership of this section. It was improperly registered to your family decades ago. Our attorneys have verified everything." I snatched the papers from her hand, my eyes scanning the pages even as my vision blurred with anger. They were maps and permits, all stamped and signed by county officials. The dates looked recent, too recent. "This is a mistake," I said, shaking my head. "I've got the original deeds. My grandfather bought this land outright, every inch of it." Linda's smile didn't falter. "I'm afraid your records are outdated. According to the latest surveys, this area falls within Valley Ridge's jurisdiction. We've already filed the necessary permits, and the county has approved them." "The county?" I choked on the words. It was like she'd pulled the ground right out from under me. "Of course," Linda continued, her tone dripping with condescension, "we're more than willing to compensate you for any inconvenience this might cause. A generous offer, really. Far more than your old barn and overgrown fields are worth." "Get off my land," I said, my voice low and shaking. "Take your bulldozers and your paperwork and get the hell out of here." Linda's expression hardened. "You really are determined to make this difficult, aren't you? Fine, proceed." She waved her hand, like she was giving an order to a pack of hunting dogs. The bulldozers roared to life, their engines snarling as they began to roll forward. "Stop!" I shouted, running toward them, waving my arms like a madman. "You can't do this! You have no right!" But the machines didn't stop. The first bulldozer plowed through my fence, tearing the posts from the ground as if they were nothing but twigs. The second rolled right over my wheat field, crushing the golden stalks I'd nurtured from seed. I ran in front of the third bulldozer, planting myself squarely in its path. The operator hesitated, his hands twitching over the controls. For a moment, I thought he might actually listen. But then Linda's voice cut through the air like a whip. "Continue!" she barked, her eyes locked on mine. The bulldozer lurched forward. I had no choice but to dive out of the way as the massive machine barreled past me, its treads tearing deep gouges into the earth. I could feel my chest heaving, my blood pounding in my ears. It was like watching my entire life being torn apart, piece by piece. I reached for my phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. The first number I called was Rick Thompson, the county clerk who'd been my friend since we were kids. If anyone could make sense of what was happening, it was Rick. He picked up on the third ring, his voice groggy. "Jimmy? What the hell are you calling me this early for?" "Rick, you need to get out here. Now. They're tearing my land apart." "What? Who is?" "The goddamn HOA from Valley Ridge. They've got bulldozers on my property. They're claiming it's theirs." "That's impossible," Rick said, sounding more awake by the second. "You've got the deeds. Your grandfather's original papers. Well, they've got papers of their own, stamped, signed, official-looking." "I'm on my way," Rick said. "Just hold tight." But holding tight was damn near impossible, with 3 bulldozers tearing through my wheat field like it was nothing but dirt. The golden stalks that I'd spent months nurturing were being ripped up and shoved into twisted piles, reduced to nothing but shredded debris. The worst part wasn't even the destruction. It was the way Linda and her cronies watched from the sidelines, sipping coffee from their overpriced travel mugs, and chatting like this was some kind of morning entertainment. Like watching my life's work crumble was just another damn photo op for their HOA newsletter. I shouted at them. cursed until my throat went raw. But they just watched, their expressions smug and superior, like they were doing me some kind of favor by even acknowledging my existence. I didn't know how long it went on, hours maybe, but by the time the machines finally rumbled to a stop, 6 acres of my wheat field had been reduced to barren earth. Nothing but churned up soil and broken stalks, scattered like corpses. Linda approached me as the bulldozers backed away, her smile smug and satisfied. "Now, Mr. Carter, perhaps you'd like to reconsider our offer." I looked her in the eye, my hands shaking with rage. "This isn't over." She placed a hand on my shoulder like she was offering some kind of twisted sympathy. "Oh, but it is. Unless you'd like to pay for today's land clearing services. That would be unfortunate." She walked away, leaving me standing there in the middle of my ruined field. I didn't realize how cold the air had gotten until I felt myself shivering. But it wasn't the chill that got to me. It was the fury, the sheer burning rage that was building up inside me. I wasn't going to let them get away with this, not without a fight. I couldn't get the image out of my head. The bulldozers ripping through my wheat, the golden stalks being shredded to nothing but piles of dead vegetation. Linda Parks watching with that cold, satisfied smile on her face, her voice echoing in my ears, taunting me with her smug assurance that this was over. It wasn't over. Not by a damn sight. I spent the rest of that day gathering every piece of paperwork I had. My grandfather's original deeds, the contracts from when he purchased Haven Hill, the maps he'd sketched by hand. All of it was stored in an old filing cabinet tucked away in the corner of my study. I hadn't opened it in years, but I knew what was in there. Knew it like I knew the lines of my own palm. By the time Rick showed up, my kitchen table was covered in yellowed papers and faded photographs. He took one look at the mess and shook his head. "Jimmy, what the hell happened out there?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. "They bulldozed my damn field, Rick. 6 acres. Gone. Destroyed. They said it was their land. Said they had the paperwork to prove it." "That's impossible," Rick replied. But there was something in his voice that sounded less like confidence and more like worry. "You've got the original deeds. Your grandfather bought this place fair and square. Well, they seem to think otherwise." I shoved the papers across the table toward him. "Look at these. These are the original documents. Dates going back to the 1920s. Ain't nothing improper about the way this land was bought." Rick glanced over the papers, his eyes narrowing. He'd always been thorough, even as a kid. Back in school, he was the one who double-checked his homework 3 times before handing it in. That was part of why I called him. I needed someone who could pick through this mess and make sense of it. "Something's off here," Rick muttered, his fingers tracing over the faded ink. "You say they had papers of their own?" "Yeah. Stamped, signed, looked official as hell. They claim the county approved their permits." Rick's face darkened. "Jimmy, if that's true, then someone's been messing with the records. And that's no small thing." I looked him in the eye. "You think someone in the county office is helping them?" Rick nodded slowly. "Wouldn't be the first time someone with deep pockets bought themselves a little influence." "I need to know who," I said, my voice low and steady, "and I need to know fast." Rick picked up his phone and started making calls. He knew people, county clerks, surveyors, lawyers, folks who'd been working in Silver Creek longer than either of us had been alive. If there was something dirty going on, Rick would sniff it out. Meanwhile, I kept poring over the papers, my eyes burning from the strain. There were old maps and blueprints, surveyor's notes scribbled in the margins, photographs of my grandfather standing in front of the barn he built with his own 2 hands. Hours passed before Rick finally looked up from his phone, his expression grim. "Jimmy, I just talked to a friend of mine at the county clerk's office. He said there's been a lot of unusual activity in the land records department lately. Files being updated, property lines being redrawn." "Redrawn?" I echoed, my fingers clenching around the edge of the table. "Yeah? And guess whose name keeps popping up on those updated documents?" "Linda Parks, one said through gritted teeth. Rick nodded. She's been filing permits left and right, claiming your eastern field was improperly registered back when your grandfather bought the adjoining parcels. Says it's been county land all along, and Valley Ridge has a right to develop it. That's bullshit, I snapped. I've got the damn deeds right here. It doesn't matter what you've got if they've altered the official records, Rick said. And from what I can tell, they've been real thorough about it. Everything Linda's done has been approved and stamped by the county. Legally, it looks like she's got every right to that land. My fists clenched so tight my knuckles turned white. There's gotta be something I can do. There is, Rick said, leaning forward, but it's gonna take time. We need to prove those documents are fake. And that means going through the county's records, finding every discrepancy, every mistake. It's not going to be easy. I don't care how hard it is, I growled. They destroyed my land, Rick. 6 acres of wheat, gone, just like that. And they're going to pay for it. Rick gave me a long, hard look. You sure you're ready to go up against Linda Parks and her HOA? She's got money, connections. Hell, her husband's a state senator. This could get ugly. Ugly. I laughed bitterly. It's already ugly. I'm not backing down. Not now. Not ever. Rick nodded, his expression serious. All right then. I'll start digging. But you need to be ready for whatever comes next. These people, they don't play fair. Neither do I said, my voice cold and steady. Not when it comes to my land. Rick stayed late that night, helping me sort through the mountain of paperwork. We went over every document, every map, looking for anything that might help us fight back. It wasn't until nearly midnight when Rick finally left, his eyes bloodshot and his shoulders slumped. But he promised me he'd be back the next day. After he drove off, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the mess of papers in front of me. The anger was still there, simmering just below the surface. But there was something else now, too. Determination. If Linda Parks thought she could just steamroll her way through Haven Hill, she was about to learn the hard way just how wrong she was. I'd fight her. I'd fight every last one of them. And I wouldn't stop until I took back what was rightfully mine. They thought they could break me, but all they'd done was wake me up, and that was their biggest mistake. The sun was barely up the next morning when I started making calls. I wasn't going to waste another minute letting Linda Parks tear my land apart. The rage that had been simmering inside me all night had turned into something else focus. The first call I made was to Diane Fields, my old college friend who'd gone on to become one of the most respected property attorneys in the state. We hadn't spoken in years, but if there was anyone I trusted to help me untangle this mess, it was her. Henry Carter, she said when she picked up. Her voice sounded surprised, but warm. Well, this is a blast from the past. What's got you calling me before breakfast? Trouble, Diane. The kind that shows up with bulldozers and lawyers. She listened as I laid it all out for her. Every detail. From the threats Linda had made, to the fake paperwork, to the destruction of my field. When I finished, the line went quiet for a moment. Sounds like you've got yourself a hell of a fight, Henry, Diane finally said. But if you've got the original deeds, and if what you're saying about the county records being altered is true, we can nail them. That's what I was hoping to hear, I replied. How soon can you get down here? I can clear my schedule for the weekend. Be there tomorrow. Tomorrow? I laughed, but there was no joy in it. I'm not sure I've got that kind of time, Diane. These people aren't wasting any? All right. I'll drive down tonight. Just give me a few hours to pull some things together. Thanks, Diane. I owe you 1. You owe me about 10, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. But we'll talk about that later. Just keep everything you've got safe and ready for me to go through. And Henry, be careful. If they've gone this far already, they won't hesitate to push harder. I hung up feeling a little more sure of myself. Diane wasn't just a friend. She was a damn good lawyer. The kind who didn't back down no matter who she was up against. Rick showed up later that afternoon, his eyes bloodshot and his shirt rumpled. He looked like he hadn't slept a wink. I did some digging, he said. collapsing into one of my kitchen chairs. "You're not gonna like what I found. Lay it on me." Rick pulled a manila folder from his bag and spread the documents across the table. Linda's been greasing palms all over the county office. Bribes, favors, promises of development contracts. Hell, she's even got her husband, the state senator, leaning on folks to push her permits through. I could feel my blood boiling again. "So she's got half the county in her pocket?" "More like the whole damn county," Rick replied. "She's got her fingers in everything." "But it's not just the permits, Jimmy. It's the survey records. They've been altered, rewritten to make it look like that eastern field of yours was never part of Haven Hill." "But I've got the original deeds," I said, jabbing my finger at the stack of papers on the table. "Doesn't matter if the official records have been doctored. If it comes down to a legal battle, they'll argue that your paperwork is outdated or improperly filed." "Diane's coming down tonight," I said. "She'll know what to do." "Good," Rick said, but there was a heaviness in his voice. "Because you're gonna need all the help you can get." I spent the rest of the day going over my paperwork again, making sure everything was in order. When Diane arrived later that evening, she looked tired but determined. She dumped her bags by the door and immediately started poring over the documents. Rick and I had gathered. We spent hours sifting through every scrap of paper, comparing my deeds to the altered records. Rick had uncovered. Diane's eyes were sharp, her fingers moving quickly over the documents, like she was piecing together a puzzle only she could see. "There's definitely foul play here," she said, her voice clipped and efficient. "They've altered the surveys to make it look like your eastern field is part of some unclaimed parcel. And then they filed permits to develop it as community land. So what do?" I asked. "We fight," Diane replied, her eyes flashing. "But it's not just about proving your ownership. We need to show that they've been manipulating the system, bribing officials, falsifying records. If we can prove any of that, it'll blow their whole case apart." Rick leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. "Easier said than done, maybe," Diane admitted. "But I've taken down bigger fish than Linda Parks. And if her husband's involved, that just makes the stakes higher. Think you can handle it?" I asked. She smirked. "Handle it? Henry, I live for this kind of fight." The next morning, Diane made some calls of her own. She had contacts all over the state, lawyers, surveyors, even a couple of retired judges who owed her favors. By noon, she'd already dug up more dirt on Linda Parks than I'd thought possible. Turns out Linda had been buying up properties all around Valley Ridge, using her position as HOA president to manipulate homeowners into selling at cut-rate prices. The same tactics she was using on me, she'd been using on others for years. "She's building an empire," Diane said, her tone icy. "And she doesn't care who she has to steamroll to get what she wants." "Well, she picked the wrong man to steamroll this time," I replied. Rick shot me a worried look. "Jimmy, you need to be careful. If Linda's willing to falsify records and bribe officials, there's no telling what she'll do next." "That's why I've got you two here," I said. "I'm not planning on going down without a fight." Diane smiled, but there was a darkness behind it. "Good, because we're just getting started." She spent the rest of the day filing motions, contacting county offices, and laying the groundwork for what was sure to be one hell of a legal battle. I watched her work with a kind of ferocity I hadn't seen in years. Diane was like a pit bull when she got her teeth into something. And right now, she had Linda Parks in her sights. But even as I felt the first flickers of hope, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that we were only scratching the surface. Linda Parks wasn't the type to back down, and whatever she had planned next, I knew it was going to be worse than anything she'd pulled so far. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see were those damn bulldozers tearing through my field, crushing the life out of the land my grandfather had poured his soul into. It wasn't just anger burning in my chest, it was something colder, heavier, a feeling that told me this was far from over. Diane and Rick were back at my place before the sun was even up, and it didn't take long for us to get to work. Diane had me make copies of everything. every deed, survey, and permit I could find. She was methodical, her eyes sharp as a hawk's as she pored over the documents. By noon, she'd already made a list of names. County officials, surveyors, lawyers, anyone who might have had a hand in pushing Linda's schemes through the system. "Rick, you know any of these folks?" Diane asked, sliding the list across the table. Rick studied the names, his brow furrowed. "A few, but a lot of these are new faces, hired on in the last couple of years. That's not a coincidence." "No, it's not," Diane replied, her fingers tapping against the table. "Linda's been planting her people wherever she can, making sure she's got influence in all the right places." "So how do we fight that?" I asked. "By going over their heads," Diane said. "If we can prove the records were tampered with, we can make our case in court. But we need to get to the right people first. People who aren't in Linda's pocket." Rick looked at me, his expression tense. "That's going to be tough, Jimmy. She's got the county wrapped around her finger. And her husband, he's got connections even higher up." "Then we go higher," I said. "If the county's been compromised, we take it to the state." Diane nodded approvingly. "Exactly. But before we do that, we need to make sure our evidence is airtight. I'm going to file for an injunction. If it goes through, it'll stop Linda from doing any more damage until this gets sorted out." "What are the odds of that working?" I asked. "Depends on how deep Linda's influence goes," Diane admitted. "But it's a start. And if it fails, we regroup and hit them even harder." Rick let out a low whistle. "You always were a bulldog, Diane." "Damn right," she said with a grin. "And I'm not about to let some overstuffed HOA queen take down Haven Hill." We spent the rest of the day gathering evidence, making phone calls, and preparing our case. Diane filed the injunction that afternoon, and we all sat around the kitchen table waiting for the phone to ring. When it finally did, the news wasn't good. "They denied it," Diane said, her voice tight with frustration. "The judge ruled that the permits Linda filed were legitimate. They're not going to stop her unless we can prove otherwise." "So what now?" I asked, feeling that cold weight in my chest grow heavier. "Now we find proof," Diane replied, her eyes blazing with determination. "Whatever it takes." Rick glanced at his phone, his thumb twitching nervously over the screen. "Jimmy, there's something else you need to know." While I was digging through the county records, I found something off. Off how? It's not just the permits Linda's been pushing through, it's the property lines themselves. They've been redrawn to include parts of Haven Hill, not just the eastern field. Other sections too, including the creek. I felt my blood run cold. The creek was the lifeblood of this land, the water that kept my crops alive, that fed into the reservoir my grandfather had built by hand. If they were trying to claim the creek, they're after the water, I said, my voice coming out like a growl. "That's what this is all about." Diane's eyes narrowed. "Water rights. If Linda's been manipulating the property lines to include the creek, then she's not just trying to steal your land. She's trying to control the entire water supply for Valley Ridge." "And if she controls the water," Rick added, his voice grim, "she controls everything." I clenched my fists so hard my knuckles went white. "So how do we prove it?" Rick reached into his bag and pulled out a crumpled old map. "I found this buried in the county archives. It's a survey from the 1960s, back when your grandfather expanded Haven Hill. It shows the original property lines, including the creek." Diane snatched the map from his hands, her eyes lighting up. "This is exactly what we need. If we can show that the property lines were altered, we can challenge everything Linda's done. But we need more than just an old map," Rick warned. "We need something concrete, official." Diane nodded. "We need to get our hands on the original records, the ones Linda hasn't had a chance to tamper with. And I think I know where to find them." She laid out her plan with the kind of precision that only comes from years of experience. We'd have to dig deep, reach out to old contacts, maybe even hire a private investigator, whatever it took to expose Linda's corruption. By the time Diane finished explaining, my head was spinning. But I felt something I hadn't felt in days. Hope. "All right," I said. Let's do this. Rick looked at me, his expression still filled with worry. Jimmy, this is gonna get ugly. You know that, right? It's already ugly, I replied. They tore up my land. They tried to steal my water. And they've been buying off anyone who gets in their way. If they want to fight, then that's exactly what they're gonna get. Diane grinned. Now you're talking. I'll make some calls. And, Rick, you keep digging. Anything you can find, anything that'll prove they've been tampering with the records. Rick nodded, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He knew what we were up against. Hell, we all did. But I didn't care. They'd come after me. After my family's legacy. And I wasn't about to let them take it without a fight. Linda Parks thought she could bully me into submission, that she could buy the county, rewrite history, and claim what was never hers. But she'd made a mistake. She underestimated me. And now she was about to learn the hard way that some things are worth fighting for. I didn't expect to hear from Diane until at least the next morning, but she called me around midnight. Her voice was sharp and full of that focused intensity she always had when she was on to something big. Henry, I've got good news and bad news, she said, her words crackling through the old phone line. Start with the good, I replied, leaning against the kitchen counter. I'd been nursing a pot of coffee like it was the only thing keeping me standing. I found someone who can get us into the county archives. The real ones. The records that haven't been tampered with. That's great. What's the bad news? Diane hesitated, and I could almost hear her pacing on the other end of the line. Whoever Linda's been paying off, they're on to us. I tried pulling a few files today and ran into a stone wall. And from what I hear, Linda's been putting pressure on the local government to shut us down. Damn it, I muttered. So, what's the plan? We need to get into those archives before Linda makes them disappear, Diane said. And, I mean, all of them. Deeds, water rights, property lines, everything. You think she's got people watching the records? I'd bet money on it. But there's still one place they haven't touched yet. An off-site storage facility the county uses for old records, from before everything went digital. You're saying we've got to do this the old-fashioned way. Exactly. And I've already got us an appointment with the facility manager tomorrow morning. You, me, and Rick. We're going to find the truth if it's the last thing we do. I agreed and hung up the phone, my mind spinning with plans and counterplans. If Linda thought she could scare me off, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. Rick showed up at my place around sunrise. He looked worse than ever, pale, jittery, like he'd been chewing nails all night. Jimmy, we got a problem, he said, his voice low and shaky. What now? I asked, already feeling my temper fraying. Linda's people have been sniffing around my office, asking questions, trying to find out what I've been working on. One of my contacts at the county office said they're trying to pin something on me. Make it look like I tampered with the records instead of them. Damn it, Rick. Why didn't you call me sooner? I didn't want to drag you into it any more than you already are. But they're coming after me, Jimmy. And if they can take me down, they'll make sure you never see a fair trial. You're not going down for this, I said, my voice hard as steel. They want a fight? We'll give them one. Rick looked at me, his eyes full of fear and something else, maybe guilt. You sure about this, Jimmy? Because once we push back, there's no turning around. I was sure the moment they tore up my field. Diane showed up about an hour later, her car kicking up dust as she pulled into the driveway. She stepped out looking like she hadn't slept in days, but there was a fire in her eyes that I hadn't seen since we were kids. We've got to move fast, she said, cutting right to the chase. I pulled every string I could to get us access to that off-site storage facility. But if Linda's people catch wind of what we're doing, they'll shut us out for good. Then we better get going, I said, grabbing my coat. The drive to the storage facility took us about an hour. It was tucked away on the outskirts of Silver Creek, a nondescript building surrounded by overgrown weeds and rusted chain-link fencing. The facility manager was an older guy named Tom, a retired county worker who'd spent most of his life archiving records. Diane had pulled some strings to get us access, but even so, Tom looked nervous as hell when he unlocked the gate for us. "I don't know what you're looking for," he said, wiping sweat from his brow, even though the air was cool. "But you better make it quick. Word's been going around that the county's planning to move all the old records to a new digital system. And when they do, who knows what'll get lost along the way." "We appreciate your help, Tom," Diane said, her tone crisp but polite. "We won't be long." Tom led us inside, his keys jangling as he unlocked a series of doors until we reached the archive room. It was like stepping back in time, rows upon rows of dusty file cabinets and metal shelves stacked high with old boxes. "This is it," Tom said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've got about an hour before anyone starts asking questions. After that, you're on your own." He left us to it, and Diane wasted no time getting to work. She directed Rick to one side of the room and me to the other. Our goal was simple: find the original surveys and deeds that proved Haven. Hill's boundaries included the eastern field and the creek. My hands trembled as I pulled open drawer after drawer, my fingers sifting through brittle maps and faded documents. The air was thick with the smell of old paper, and the silence was only broken by the sound of files being shuffled. "Got something!" Rick called from across the room, his voice full of excitement. I rushed over to find him holding a large, rolled-up map. He spread it out on a nearby table, and Diane hurried over, her eyes widening as she looked it over. "This is it," she said, her voice trembling with something close to triumph. "The original survey from when your grandfather expanded Haven Hill in 1947. It shows the creek. It shows everything." I felt a weight lift off my chest. But just as quickly, another fear took its place. "How do we prove it's real?" I asked. Diane's eyes gleamed. "We compare it to the official records. The ones Linda's people have been altering. If we can show that the original survey doesn't match the modified documents, we can expose their fraud." We took photos, made copies of everything we could find. My hands were shaking the whole time, but I didn't care. This was it, our proof. But just as we were about to leave, we heard the sound of tires crunching gravel outside. More than one car. Rick's eyes went wide with panic. "Damn it, Jimmy, they're here." My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. Rick's voice had that panic edge to it, the kind that makes your gut tighten like you've been punched. Through the narrow window, I could see two black SUVs pulling up outside the storage facility. They looked like the kind of cars you see in movies when the FBI rolls in to shut something down. Only this wasn't the FBI. This was Linda Park's muscle, coming to clean up whatever mess we were about to uncover. "Diane, we've got company," I said, my voice coming out rough and strained. She was still hunched over the table, eyes glued to the documents we'd found. But when I spoke, her head snapped up, eyes narrowing with that fierce determination I'd come to count on. "Damn it," she muttered. "They must have had someone watching the archives." Rick looked like he was about to bolt. His hands were shaking so bad, I thought he might drop the map he was holding. "Jimmy, we need to get the hell out of here. Now." "No," Diane snapped, her voice sharp and unforgiving. "We're not running. Not when we're this close." "Close to what?" Rick asked, his voice cracking. "Getting ourselves killed?" Diane shot him a glare. "No. Close to proving that Linda's been falsifying records. We've got the original survey. We just need to get it out of here before they do." I could hear car doors slamming outside. Footsteps. More than a few. Whoever they weren't coming in for a friendly chat. "What do you want me to do, Diane?" I asked, my voice low and steady. "Take these," she said, shoving a stack of papers into my hands. "The originals. Get them out of here. Rick, you go with him. I'll hold them off." "Hold them off?" "Diane, you're not serious," Rick stammered. "Just do it," she snapped. "You're wasting time." Rick looked like he was about to argue, but something in Diane's eyes made him think twice. Instead, he grabbed me by the arm and started pulling me toward the back door. We moved fast, ducking down narrow hallways lined with more file cabinets and dusty old boxes. My hands were sweating, the papers slipping in my grip, but I held on tight. Outside, the air was thick and heavy. The sky was churning with dark clouds, like a storm was about to break loose. We sprinted toward Rick's truck, his keys already jingling in his hands. "Get in," he barked, his voice raw with panic. I threw myself into the passenger seat, the door slamming shut just as Rick jammed the key into the ignition. The truck roared to life, tires spinning as he floored it. Gravel sprayed behind us like shrapnel. "Damn it, Rick! Slow down," I said, clutching the stack of papers to my chest. "If they catch us, it won't matter how fast I'm going," he shot back, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror. I looked back and saw them, two men in suits. One of them already pulling out a phone, probably calling Linda or someone even higher up the ladder. "Diane's still in there," I said, the guilt already clawing at me. "She knows what she's doing," Rick replied, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "She told us to get these papers out, so that's what we're doing." I didn't like it. Leaving Diane behind felt like betrayal, but I also knew she was right. If we lost these documents, everything we'd worked for would be gone. Rick drove like a madman, cutting down side roads and weaving through back alleys like he was trying to shake off the devil himself. I kept glancing back, half expecting those SUVs to come barreling down on us. By the time we reached my place, my nerves were so frayed I could barely keep my hands from shaking. Rick killed the engine and looked over at me, his eyes wild and glassy. "Jimmy, what the hell have we gotten ourselves into?" he whispered. "We're just doing what's right," I said. But even I could hear the doubt in my own voice. We rushed inside, locking the doors behind us. I spread the documents out on the kitchen table, my eyes scanning over the maps and deeds like they were treasure maps. And, in a way, they were. Proof that Haven Hill had always been ours. Proof that Linda had no right to tear apart my land. Rick paced the room like a caged animal. Every few seconds, he'd glance at the window like he expected Linda's goons to come crashing through any minute. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice tight and frantic. "Now we wait for Diane," I said. "She'll make it out. She has to." But as the hours dragged on, my confidence started to waver. Diane should have been back by now. She was tough, but she wasn't invincible. Rick was practically tearing his hair out by the time my phone finally rang. I snatched it up so fast I almost dropped it. "Diane?" I said, my voice shaking. "Yeah, it's me," she replied, her voice steady but strained. I got out. Barely. They tried to block me in, but I slipped through the side entrance. Guess they weren't expecting a back door. Relief flooded through me like cool water on a scorching day. "You're all right." "I'm fine. But we don't have much time. Linda's got people everywhere. They know we've got the documents, and they'll do whatever it takes to get them back." "Let them try," I growled. "We've got proof. We can take this to the state if we have to." "That's the plan," Diane said. "But we need to move fast. They're not going to play fair. They haven't been so far, and it's only going to get worse." I looked over at Rick, who was pale and trembling. The man had been my friend since childhood, but he wasn't built for this kind of fight. Not the way Diane and I were. "All right," I said. "What's our next move?" "We go public," Diane replied. "If we can't trust the county to do the right thing, we make them. And if that means putting every dirty deal Linda's made on blast, then so be it." I hung up the phone, my jaw clenched tight. Linda had made her move. Now it was time for me to make mine. Going public wasn't going to be easy. Diane made that clear right from the start. If we wanted to expose Linda and her HOA cronies, we had to do it right. No mistakes. No loose ends. Everything had to be airtight. The first thing Diane did was start contacting reporters. Not just the local hacks who might be in Linda's pocket, but real journalists. The kind who'd love nothing more than to tear down some overreaching HOA president with delusions of grandeur. Rick looked like he was about to have a heart attack when Diane mentioned going to the press. I couldn't blame him. The man had never been one for confrontation. And now we were about to declare war on the most powerful woman in the county. "Jimmy, are you sure about this?" Rick asked for the 10th time, his voice trembling as he paced back and forth across my kitchen. Yes, Rick, I said, my patience wearing thin. This is the only way. Linda's got too many people on her payroll. The only way we beat her is by making this so public she can't cover it up. But if this goes wrong, he started, but I cut him off. It won't. Diane had already drafted up statements, collected copies of the original surveys, and gathered witness testimonials from other homeowners. Linda had bullied over the years. The more we dug, the more rot we uncovered. It was like pulling back a curtain and finding a nest of snakes. I couldn't believe how many people had been steamrolled by Linda's HOA. Families who'd been fined into bankruptcy. Elderly folks threatened with foreclosure because their flower beds didn't meet community standards. And every single one of them too scared or too beaten down to fight back. Diane had a way of talking to people, though, calming them down, making them feel like their voices mattered. By the time she was done, we had half a dozen people ready to go on record about what Linda had done to them. Rick, meanwhile, was scouring the county archives for any trace of Linda's dirty dealings. He was terrified, but he was loyal, and he was good at what he did. We worked day and night, piecing together a case so solid even Linda's money couldn't wash it away. And when Diane finally called the reporters, they came swarming like vultures to a fresh kill. The morning the news broke, it was like someone had kicked over a hornet's nest. I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing nonstop. Calls, texts, emails. I couldn't even keep track of them all. Diane had made sure to spread the story far and wide. Regional news outlets, online publications. Even a couple of national networks picked it up. Retired, farmer takes on HOA tyrant. Silver Creek land battle exposes widespread corruption. State senator's wife accused of bribery and fraud. Every headline seemed bigger and uglier than the last, and I couldn't help but smile. For once, the spotlight was on Linda Parks. The calls weren't all friendly, of course. Some of them were threats, thinly veiled or otherwise. Linda's allies trying to scare me into silence. But the more they pushed, the more determined I became. Diane was right. Going public was the only way to force their hand. And it worked. Within a day of the first reports hitting the airwaves, Linda's people started to crack. Rick's phone calls to the county office suddenly started getting returned. Officials who'd been stonewalling us for weeks were now tripping over themselves to cooperate. Documents that had been lost mysteriously turned up. Files that had been doctored were now being reviewed for tampering. It was like a dam breaking. The more pressure we applied, the more the truth spilled out. But Linda didn't go down quietly. 2 days after the story broke, a lawyer showed up at my door. Some high-priced suit from the city, spouting legal jargon about defamation and slander. He handed me a letter threatening to sue me for $2 million unless I publicly retracted my statements, and issued a formal apology to Linda Parks and the Valley Ridge HOA. I laughed in his face, told him to take his threats and shove them where the sun don't shine. He left, looking more confused than angry. Guess he wasn't used to people telling him to piss off. Diane wasn't surprised by the lawsuit. She'd been expecting it. "They're desperate," she said, her tone calm and clinical. "Linda's losing control of the narrative, and she knows it. This lawsuit is just her way of trying to scare you into backing down." "It's not going to work," I replied. "No, it's not. But you need to be prepared. Things are going to get worse before they get better." She wasn't wrong. The backlash was brutal. Linda's supporters launched their own smear campaign against me. They painted me as a stubborn old man, trying to sabotage their precious community. They called me a liar, a troublemaker, a washed-up relic who refused to adapt to the times. But for every attack they threw at me, we hit back twice as hard. Diane had made sure of that. Rick uncovered more evidence of Linda's corruption. Payments she'd made to county officials, kickbacks disguised as consultation fees. It was all there, hidden in plain sight for anyone willing to dig deep enough. Diane filed a countersuit, not just against Linda, but against the entire Valley Ridge HOA, alleging fraud, property theft, and conspiracy. The news ate it up. Reporters camped outside my house. shoving microphones in my face every time I stepped outside. I hated it, but I endured it. Because this wasn't just about me. It was about Haven Hill, about my grandfather's legacy, about every family Linda Parks had bulldozed on her way to the top. And I wasn't going to stop until I tore her entire empire down. It all came down to that courtroom. Months of fighting, of digging through files and making enemies I didn't even know existed. Every time I thought we'd made progress, Linda came back swinging twice as hard. Lawsuits, smear campaigns, even attempts to buy off Diane's witnesses. She threw everything she had at us. But we were still standing. Diane had warned me this day would come, that Linda would use every ounce of power and influence. She had to crush me into the dirt. And from the look of things, she'd called in every favor, pulled every string to make sure she came out on top. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, Valley Ridge residents, county officials, even a few of Linda's cronies who had the nerve to show their faces. And right there, sitting at the front with her high-priced lawyers and her husband by her side, was Linda Parks herself. She looked polished as ever, hair perfectly styled, makeup flawless, dressed in a dark blue suit that probably cost more than my entire truck. But her eyes, those eyes were burning with something dark and desperate. I could see it. She was scared. Diane was a damn force of nature. From the moment the proceedings began, she tore into Linda's defense like a wolf going for the throat. Every lie, every manipulated record, every bribed official, Diane laid it all out for the court to see. She had Rick testify about what he'd uncovered in the archives, about how Linda's people had tried to bury the original deeds and replace them with falsified documents. I sat there, watching as Diane turned what should have been a losing battle into something damn near legendary. She wasn't just fighting for me, she was fighting for everyone Linda had stepped on to build her empire. Linda's lawyers tried to paint me as some old, bitter man clinging to outdated property lines. They said I was delusional, a paranoid fool making baseless accusations against a respectable community leader. But Diane shut them down at every turn. Every piece of evidence they tried to discredit, she backed up with cold, hard facts. Every time they tried to twist my words, she brought the conversation right back to what mattered. The truth. I had to testify, of course. They made me sit there in front of everyone, recounting everything that had happened, from the moment Linda showed up on my doorstep with her threats to the day her bulldozers tore up my field. I told them about my grandfather, about how he'd built Haven Hill from nothing, about the sacrifices my family had made to keep that land going. I told them how I'd come home to find the fields torn apart, the ground shredded and scarred. It wasn't easy. I could feel Linda's eyes on me the whole time, drilling into me like daggers. But I didn't flinch, didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. When it was finally her turn to testify, Linda put on the performance of a lifetime. She played the part of the victim, talking about how my unreasonable hostility had disrupted her community, how she'd only ever wanted what was best for Valley Ridge. She was good. I'll give her that. She had the judge listening, nodding along like she was some kind of saint. But then Diane stepped up for the cross-examination, and that's when things got interesting. Diane hit her with question after question, forcing her to backtrack and contradict herself. And when Diane finally pulled out the original survey maps, the ones Rick and I had risked everything to recover, Linda's whole facade started to crumble. "You claim these documents were properly filed with the county, Miss S. Parks," Diane said, her voice sharp and cold. "But we have evidence proving otherwise. The original surveys clearly show that Haven Hill's property line includes the eastern field and the creek. Your attempt to alter those records is not only unethical, it's illegal." Linda's lawyers objected, of course. They threw every technicality they could think of at the judge. But the damage was done. It took hours, but by the time the judge gave his ruling, the entire courtroom knew what had happened. The permits Linda had filed? Invalid. The altered records? Falsified. The destruction of my land? A blatant act of trespass and vandalism. The judge ordered Linda and the Valley Ridge HOA to pay me damages for every acre of wheat they destroyed. And even more than that, the judge ruled that Linda had acted with malicious intent, something that carried a hefty penalty on top of everything else. But the real victory? That came when Linda was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. Turns out, bribing county officials and falsifying legal documents isn't something you can just walk away from. Rick was shaking when it was all over. I thought the poor guy might pass out right there in the courthouse. But when he finally looked up at me, his eyes were full of relief. "You did it, Jimmy," he whispered. "You actually did it." "No," I replied, clapping him on the shoulder. "We did it. You, me, and Diane. We took them down." Diane looked like she'd just won the Super Bowl. Her smile was fierce, triumphant. "Damn right we did. And we're not done yet. There are a lot of people Linda's been screwing over for years, and I plan on making sure every single one of them gets justice." We walked out of that courthouse feeling like we'd just conquered the world. The reporters swarmed us, shouting questions and shoving cameras in our faces. But for once, I didn't mind. Because we'd won. But even with the victory fresh and sharp in my mind, I couldn't help but feel the exhaustion setting in. It was over. The fight that had consumed my life for months was finally over. I drove back to Haven Hill that night, the sky dark and the air cool. As I pulled up to the farmhouse, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. I stood on the porch and looked out over the fields, the land my grandfather had worked so hard to protect. And I knew, deep down, that I'd done him proud. Haven Hill was safe. My family's legacy was secure. And Linda Parks? She was just a bad memory now. It was time to rebuild. Time to move forward. And damn it, that's exactly what I was going to do. You know, looking back on everything that happened, there's something I learned from that whole nightmare. It's not just about standing up for what's yours. It's about knowing when to fight and having the courage to see it through, no matter how tough things get. My grandfather built Haven Hill with his bare hands, pouring his sweat and soul into that land. And when someone tried to rip it away, I couldn't just roll over and let them take it. This fight taught me that persistence, integrity, and community are worth more than all the money and power in the world. It's about holding on to your values and refusing to be bullied, no matter how big or powerful the opposition seems. And you know what? It's about knowing you're not alone. Good people will stand by you when you do the right thing. I hope my story reminds you of something important, that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, to fight for your legacy, for your family, for the truth. And sometimes, it's that grit and determination that makes all the difference. If this story spoke to you, if you found something in it worth holding on to, I'd really appreciate it. If you'd hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories like this. Because together, we can keep fighting the good fight. Thanks for watching, and take care of yourselves.